My name is Mindy Werblowski. I'm the clinical director of Madraigos. Rabbi Silver and I began discussing the concept for this event over a year ago. We have recognized the issue of teens and screens for many years. However, as the problem became more prevalent, we wanted to offer the community a way to get hands-on help and support. This need became even more evident with the onset of COVID-19. Technology has not just changed what we as parents and our children have access to, but it has changed the way relationships are formed in their entirety. To not fully understand devices and new tech is to not fully understand our children. For better and for worse, technology is intrinsically part of our children's lives, and it only helps us in our role as parents to spend the time on understanding what occupies so much of their minds and behaviors. This amplified 100-fold when COVID hit. The use of technology has reached unprecedented heights. Technology has helped in so many positive ways. It has allowed schools to continue even through closings and shutdowns. It has helped us all bridge and continue connections when we are quarantined and in lockdown. And it has given us access to the outside world when our own individual worlds shrunk to the four walls of our homes. The flip side of this is that our children are more attached to their devices than ever before. Their phones no longer just supplement an existing social life. Their phones are now their entire social life. And instead of having a break from devices to go to school, their classes are so often virtual as well. And the one main question we continuously have heard is, how do I manage my child's screen time when they are always on the screen? How can I help my child have a life outside of his phone? All of this is why we have brought this event here today. We have reached out to an incredible panel of speakers to help navigate us through this sea of devices and new tech. Our panelists bring perspectives from their experiences as mental health professionals, rabbanim, educators, and principals. We hope you utilize this opportunity to gain from their vast knowledge and experience. As always, should anyone feel they want or need more individualized guidance and help, Madraigos is here to provide that for anyone, free of charge. Before beginning the program, I would like to take a moment to thank the entire executive staff at Madraigos. Rabbi Dov Silver, Rabbi Dr. David Felt, and Mrs. Sharon Gross. This event could never have gotten off the ground without everyone's input, assistance, guidance, and tremendous devotion. I am so honored to be a part of this team, and I thank you all very much. I would also like to give a special thank you to Mrs. Rena Kuttner and Mrs. Rivki Rosenwald, who facilitate our parenting support group. Rena and Rivki have graduated 9 successful groups, and we are currently forming the 10th, which will be launched in the beginning of February. Their tireless dedication and devotion to Madraigos and our parents is truly inspiring, and we are lucky to have them on board. If you are interested in joining our next parenting group, please feel free to reach out to me as well. Without any further delay, we are going to begin our program. Our moderator for tonight's program is Mr. Phil Goldfeder. Phil is a true friend to Madraigos, and we are privileged to enjoy a special and close relationship with him. Phil began his career in public service as a community liaison for the New York City Council. This soon led to a position as a director for the Mayor's Community Affairs Unit under Michael Bloomberg, and then as New York Senator Charles Schumer's Director of Intergovernmental Affairs. In September of 2011, Phil was elected to represent the 23rd District in the New York State Assembly. After most of his district was devastated during Superstorm Sandy, Phil worked tirelessly with the banking and insurance industry to reform policies and author new laws to address issues in the wake of the storm's devastation. In September of 2017, following his service in the Assembly, Phil joined Cross River Bank to lead the growing Public Affairs Department. Dr. Eli Shapiro is a licensed clinical social worker with a doctorate in education and specialist certificate in Jewish educational leadership. He is the creator and director of the Digital Citizenship Project, an adjunct professor for the City University of New York, and a trustee of the Queensborough Public Library. Dr. Shapiro is a graduate of the Azrieli School of Jewish Education and Administration, Wurzweiler School of Social Work, Touro College, and holds 2 licenses in school administration through the Queens College Postgraduate Educational Leadership Program. Dr. Shapiro has presented to thousands of parents, school faculty, and mental health professionals in communities across North America, and has lectured for internationally recognized organizations, including Agudas Israel of America, Consortium of Jewish Day Schools, International Conference of Chabad Lubavitch Shluchim, Nefesh International, the Orthodox Union, Prisma Center for Jewish Day Schools, Torah Masora, and Yeshiva University. Dr. Shapiro is an expert on the social and emotional functioning of families and leads numerous studies on Jewish families and technology. Dr. Shapiro has been instrumental in helping us form and put together this program. Rabbi Moshe Taub is the Mara Asra of the Young Israel of Holliswood. Rabbi Taub is also the rabbinic editor and a columnist at Omni Magazine and the Menahel of Tells Riverdale. Before moving to Queens, Rabbi Taub served as the Rav of the Young Israel of Buffalo and the director of the BVK Kosher Agency. Rabbi Taub shares a special relationship with his community, his students, his colleagues, and his congregants, and certainly has his finger on the pulse of today's adolescents. Our final panelist is Rabbi Dr. David Felt. Rabbi Felt has over 20 years of experience in chinuch as a high school rabbi and principal. In addition to his tremendous experience in chinuch, Rabbi Felt holds a doctorate in psychology. Rabbi Felt currently directs the preventative division at Madraigos, where he works with educators, students, and parents. He is the author and designer of the MAP program, which brings mental health awareness to educators. Rabbi Felt also oversees the Madraigos intern program. Rabbi Felt is an invaluable asset to me personally, and since he began working at Madraigos, I seek him out on an almost daily basis for his astute and insightful wisdom and guidance. Without further ado, I'm pass the program over to Phil Goldfeder.
So as you all know, we all have to make certain adjustments, and usually after a speech like that, an opening like that, you generally get a rousing applause. Unfortunately, Mindy is not getting the rousing applause she deserves. So at home, I know you are fully embracing all the work that it takes and all your appreciation for what Mindy has done here tonight and the work she does not just tonight, but all year long. And of course, when COVID hit, it was an excuse for so many people to sort of stop what they were doing, to take a break, to put things on hold. At Madraigos, it was just the opposite. They did what they always do. When there was a disaster, when there was a problem, they leaned into it and they found new ways to help. And tonight is just another example of that. I want a profound thank you to Rabbi Dov Silver, who has become a friend and a mentor to me, somebody who I've worked close with over the last few years. At my time at Cross River Bank, but even before that, in my time in public service, Rabbi Silver was a constant inspiration in how we can find new ways to help our youth, help everybody across the community, and create and provide additional services. And of course, you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with. And so we're gonna hear from my Dr. Felt soon enough. But Sharon Gross, who has been our partner in the Cross River Madraigos golf outing every single year, and is a tireless advocate for Madraigos and for the entire community. Again, it's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here. I'm Phil Goldfeder on behalf of Cross River Bank. I want to say thank you once again to the panelists. You just heard a bit about them. But now we're really going to dig down and hear more about their expertise. So, for those of you who tuned in tonight wanting to hear Nachi Gordon, I apologize in advance. He unfortunately could not be here. I am happy to play backup, and unfortunately for you, I'm not nearly as good, but I promise you I will do my absolute best. This is tonight Teens and Screens, a roundtable discussion, as you've heard, with leading experts about how to understand and deal with the many pressures and challenges that technology has brought. Now, let's be very clear. This is not doom and gloom. Technology is not all bad. And anybody who tuned in to hear that, turn it off now. Tonight we're going to hear about positivity, ways to put a leash on technology, to use it for the positive, to find ways to take what potentially could be bad and make it into a positive change for our kids and for our young adults. And so with that, I'm very excited. Panelists, are you very excited?
Sure.
They seem excited. So we're going to start with Dr. Shapiro. Dr. Shapiro, you and I sat together, and I don't even know how long ago, and a shout out to Maish at Central Perk, because I remember sitting out in the back of Central Perk, and you talked to me about what you called the Digital Citizenships Project. I recall at the time thinking it wasn't a very good name. You've been very, very successful, so clearly I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to creating new organizations, but you've made it really successful, not just because it was a new concept, but because you brought innovation to what otherwise was potentially a very difficult topic. And so with that, talk about your background of technology education. You were one of the pioneers as related to understanding how technology impacts our children. And so what are the different types of devices? Talk to me about your background and how you engage in educating our children.
Thank you, Mr. Goldfeder. Always a pleasure to be introduced by you and to share a stage with you and Rabbi Taub, Dr. Felt. So the Digital Citizenship Project started in an effort to educate on responsible use of technology. What I was seeing at the time, there was a primary focus on content and the internet, and the only strategy that was being talked about was filters. And in my research, I was seeing how technology was impacting a whole broad area of issues, including social functioning, psychological functioning, behavioral functioning, day-to-day functioning. And in the Orthodox Jewish community, we like to put things in boxes. We like to say, it's kosher, treif, mutter, usser. permissible, prohibited. We like to put things in boxes, and so technology really followed the same piece. But technology is not good, it is not bad, it is what we make of it. Technology is amazing, it's awesome, it's wonderful. How many people are we in your living rooms today as a result of technology? Imagine what it would have been like during COVID without any technology. And so this idea that technology is amazing, it's wonderful, and we need to be able to harness the opportunities that it presents, the way that we do that, the way that we maximize what technology has to offer is by understanding some of the inherent challenges that it presents. And it presents challenges in the social, psychological, and behavioral realm, in the spiritual realm as well. And if we can better understand that, there's an expression in business, what gets measured gets managed. And so if we can approach managing technology, measuring our use, and really being thoughtful and deliberative with how we utilize technology, we'll be able to have it serve as something that enhances our lives rather than something that serves as an intrusion in our lives.
So just to continue on that, and I'll allow our panelists to chime in, but what are the different types of devices, right? The parents and people who are watching today, what are the devices, what are some of the apps that kids are using that are particularly potential for harm or dangerous, and obviously, what are some of the filters and some of the technologies that are using to protect our children?
So it's a lot of questions. Each one of those we could spend a full hour just on each one of those questions. But
let's not do that.
Yeah, I'm going to try to avoid that, and I want to give the other panelists an opportunity to speak as well. But kids are utilizing technology at younger and younger ages. It becomes more affordable, and so in the past we used to talk about kids in high school getting a smartphone, and now we see kids as young as first, second, third grade starting to get these devices. And I'm often asked the question, what is the right age to get your child a device? And the answer really is more complex, and we need to think about technology not as a simple question with a simple solution, but something that is complex. The questions need to be complex, and the solutions are complex as well. So far more important than the age that you get a child a device is the process by which you indoctrinate them into utilizing that device. I'm much more comfortable if the environment is correct for a child to get a device at 15 that they're indoctrinated appropriately and the right guidelines and rules and expectations are conveyed to the child as it relates to technology than giving a 20-year-old a device with no rules, no guidelines. So it's less about the age and more about the process and the role that parents play, the critical role that parents play in that process.
Rabbi Taub, if you'd like to sort of expand on what he said in terms of the various devices, right? Do you find whether it's an iPhone or devices, even video games, which used to be pretty protected, now we're online, right? And it gives you almost essentially the same access to what a smartphone can give you. You can go on during with your video games. And so talk to me a bit about some of the different devices, what scares you, what are you afraid of, and some of the lessons you give parents.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Madraigos, I want to thank Dr. Shapiro and Dr. Felt and Rabbi Silver and Sharon Gross and you, Mr. Goldfeder, Madraigos in general for this event. And before I get to your question, I want to quote a pasuk. Because really, Dr. Felt and Dr. Shapiro belong here. I'm somewhat of an interloper. I've always felt, and I still believe, that Rabbanim have to be aware of the Peter principle, the limits of their knowledge. I am not an expert by any definition of that term relating to the serious issue of technology and teens and screens, other than the fact that I'm raising 4 daughters and a son. But there is a role for a Rav. The Pasuk in Nehemiah teaches us at a very critical juncture in Jewish history, a message had to be told to the Jewish nation. And the Pasuk says, Ezra HaSofer, you have the rabbi, V'halaviim hamavinim es ha'am, and the leaders who understand the people. And I think that Dr. Felt and Dr. Shapiro in particular are 2 people who understand the nation and understand the culture that we're in. And my only goal is to share what I see both educationally and rabbinically and maybe give some of it a halachic and hashkafic bent to it. I also want to echo what Dr. Shapiro said and what I'm sure Dr. Felt will also echo, that we're not here for doom and gloom. You mentioned this as well. The Gemara tells us even the Torah HaKadosha, which is everything else is batal, is nullified to the Torah, could either be a Sam HaChayim, a medicine for life, or a Sam HaMaves. Everything has a good and a bad. There's a yin and a yang. So we don't have to feel that by openly discussing the dangers of technology, we are putting our head in the sand and we are in denial of the world that we live in. We are here tonight and you are watching tonight because we understand the reality that we're in. And we want to utilize this as a samachayim. The great irony is that we're doing this during COVID. And Torah would have, who knows what would have happened without technology, and without Zoom, and without live stream. So we certainly have taken advantage of technology and continue to take advantage of it in good ways. One last point of intro, in my excitement for this event, I was remiss. I also want to mention that I teach at Shevach, the Queens local Beis Yaakov High School. I want to mention them as well, and my interaction with those girls have helped greatly. There are so many devices, and I think as parents, when you asked Dr. Shapiro about the devices, as a parent, I quickly took out my pen to take notes because it changes so fast and so frequently. And I think as parents, we have this challenge of trying to keep up with the new app and the new device. I do think, and I'll just make this one point for now, that as parents, we certainly have to have an open dialogue with our children. I think because we are somewhat in the dark about the devices and about the apps, there has to be an open communication. And I think crucial among that, I'll just tell you a quick story, and with this I'll pass it over to you, to the moderator, and to Dr. Felt. The Rebbitzin of Hollywood, Florida, Rebbitzin Meira David, told me the story. She used to give a bas mitzvah class to all the bas mitzvah girls in their 600 family shul. And every time she gives this, every year, to the graduating bas mitzvah program class, she would always try to instill in them the joy of Shabbos. And she would always ask them, what do you enjoy the most about Shabbos? And you would get the typical cliched answer, oh, the Zmiros are fantastic. The Parsha sheet is amazing. Another girl says, the time I get to spend with my little brother. Complete lies, all of them. One girl, she said, gave an honest answer. What I look forward to about Shabbos is that my parents don't have cell phones with them and they pay attention to us at the Shabbos table. I think the most crucial message that I want to give over to parents, as a parent myself, if you want to be in the loop of the new devices and if you want to be in the loop of the new apps, you have to show your own personal responsibility in that. And I think if we show our personal responsibility, there'll be an open dialogue. And I'm sure we'll get into more details as we go relating to the new apps and devices as well.
And I want to just jump on what you said there. The idea of speaking kids' language when it comes to technology, communicating with them. The term that we use for kids today, they're digital natives, and we are digital immigrants. And I often give the example during immigration in the 1920s. One of the challenges was that parents were speaking Yiddish and kids were speaking English, and that created really a problem in their growth and development and the relationships between parents and kids. Similarly, today, our kids are speaking digital, and we're still speaking the proverbial Yiddish. And so we need to better understand our kids' experience with technology, really have them explain to us their experience in a non-judgmental way, and the communication is so critical. I've been fortunate to collect data from kids across the country, probably close to 4,000. When I talk a lot about data. Some of my audience members feel that I spend too much time with data. Actually, about 72% of my audience says that there's too much data. But what I found is really fascinating. I gave kids the choice, who is the number one influence on what you think is appropriate or not appropriate when it comes to technology? And the choice is parents, teachers, friends, etc. And more than half say, my parents are the number one influence in what I think is appropriate when it comes to technology. And so there are competing interests and there are competing influence, but the number one influence is parents, and it's not just limited to technology, it's parenting as a whole. What we inculcate into our kids, what we model for our kids is what they're going to see. And so if we model responsible digital behavior, if we put the phone down and communicate with our kids will follow that lead as well.
So Rabbi Dr. Felt, and I want to go to you. Number one, first, thank you for what you do all year round. Again, all the panelists who spend so much time, but committing and donating so much of your time and energy to Madraigos and to other, not just to here, but in charge of the intern program. I don't think people realize the reach that Madraigos has, not just in these four walls, but in institutions all across the neighborhood and even farther. And so let me, something interesting. Growing up, and I'm going to age myself, I know with these young good looks you wouldn't have imagined, but we had a Commodore 64, right? It was the new computer, and I remember so distinctly as we were playing with me and my brothers, as my parents came down to try and understand what it is we were doing with this machine and how we were interacting with it, and they couldn't quite grasp it. As we grew with the various technologies.
Ping pong? Was that the first
Yeah,
game?
Pong, exactly,
Pong,
or Space
exactly.
Invaders.
Also dates me. But.
What was interesting is as we grew up with the various new games and new things that came out, I was sort of the expert in the household, and now I find myself, I have 3 little kids at home, I don't have a clue. I mean, I literally don't have a clue. And so as a parent myself who has, almost a teenage girl and 2 sons, what kind of things are in place, or what kind of things can you give advice to parents, practical that they could do, things that they can do, things they could put in place to prevent maybe some of the issues that have arisen?
Okay, thank you, Phil. Let me first of all just, to begin, I would like to publicly thank Mindy Wablowski. Mindy is our clinical director for setting this up and for organizing this evening. Mrs. Sharon Gross, and obviously Rabbi Silva for making everything that happens at Madraigos happen. And specifically this evening, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Rabbi Taub. I never had the opportunity of meeting you, and it's my pleasure. And also Dr. Eli Shapiro. Thank you very much. So actually, Phil, it's an excellent question. I was schmoozing with some of the boys at the lounge a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking, and one of the boys actually brought up Teens and Screens. He said, oh, Madraigos is doing this Teens and Screens, what's it all about? And so, I shared with them that, the idea for tonight is to help parents, learn more about technology, to learn more about what's happening, with their children using technology. And that kind of right away, answers your question. Parents need to get involved, need to find out much more. And, it happens to be one of the boys made a very interesting comment. He said to me, I was very into, the game at that time was Fortnite. I was very into it. And my parents were, they were frustrated. They didn't know how to, get me to focus on schoolwork and just to stop playing. I was playing till way into the night. And so what they did was they said, here, let me give you this smartphone with unfettered internet, and we'll trade that for Fortnite. Now, he was laughing because he said they didn't know what they were doing. They basically put in my hand something that I could access, anything and do anything. And, as we'll talk later on, we'll hear some of the things that kids get into using their phones. They have something on their, so to speak, their body that they could just do anything with. And his parents, this is a child pointing out that my parents didn't realize what that exchange wasn't a fair exchange, and what they only, had they only known and what they only did. So the answer to the question really is you need to get involved. You need to find out more about what's out there. Tonight, hopefully you will find out much more. And get involved with your child, as both Rabbi Taub and Dr. Shapiro mentioned. You need to create that relationship with your child. You need to get involved in their life. And tonight, the more you learn about technology, the more you learn about the dangers of technology, the more we're able to, and as was echoed earlier, the more we're able to use technology for the right thing.
I just mentioned, I've asked my kids several times to explain to me Fortnite, and I still don't understand how that game works.
That's an amazing game. They pumped in every single psychological trick in that game to get kids to be addicted to it.
Fortnite is actually old. It's very much last year. Kids are.
We're dating
kids are,
I'm an old-fashioned guy.
Among Us is the up-and-coming game that kids are playing. I want to echo this idea of conversation with kids. Most kids expect, and because of this generational disconnect, most kids expect us, the adults, to come in with an agenda when it comes to technology. We're going to minimize, we're going to take away, right? And I had the good fortune of being able to speak to my son's 7th grade class last year. I was invited by the Rebbe. My son surprisingly had no objection. He was actually excited for me to come speak. So I spoke to his class last year. I thought it went pretty well. This past Shabbos, actually, the kids had seen the ad for this Madraigos event in the paper, and they were at my house hanging out with my son, and they said, can you come back to our class this year and speak again? Now, I don't know if they just found me more interesting than the Rebbe, or they actually enjoyed the content, but they have a pretty good Rebbe. Both years they have a pretty good Rebbe. So I said, well, are there any questions that you have that you would like brought up? Again, these are 8th graders, 13-year-old boys. Any questions that you have that you'd like to see brought up at this event? So I don't know if they're watching tonight, but one of the boys said, how much is too much screen time? There's an 8th grader, 13-year-old, asking this question. So it's interesting. I think we established this idea that by not coming in with an agenda, we can have these conversations. And the answer is everybody waiting for the answer? Because, and the answer is that it's really unclear. There's no number, there's no targeted number that says, okay, an hour and 2 minutes an evening is the right amount of screen time. Right? In fact, screen time to me is a misconception. The idea, we hear studies and research, screen time this, 2 hours of screen time, 3 hours. Screen time is a misconception because, and I think we learned this through COVID more than anything else, screen time, I call it the 4 C's. 4 C's, consumption is the most basic type of screen time. Complementary is more interactive, video gaming type, where there's visual motor integration, there's problem solving, and games like Fortnite or Among Us are social in nature because you're collaborating with other people to solve problems. So there's a collaborative nature to it. Communication, which is a higher level of screen time, where I might be texting, communicating, chatting, video, family, friends. We've been isolated. We have family in Eretz Yisrael. We have family in Canada. How are we going to, right? So communication is a higher level. And then the highest level of technology screen time is creative. And programs like this, or coding, or graphic design, or something where there's a process of creativity. So when we hear the term screen time, it's really a misconception, and we have to be more sophisticated about how we approach screens, and therefore there is no one answer that this is the right amount of screen time.
I'm so happy you said that because over COVID, the Eschatayni Masker Yom on my iPhone, it tells you how much screen time you used that day. Right. And I opened it up one day and it said like 6 hours and 30 minutes of screen time. Right. I didn't know what's going on. I found out my son was taking my phone at 6 o'clock in the morning. He's 5 years old. But I do want to, I want to ask your opinion on this. I've noticed that when it comes to communication with my children, I'm speaking anecdotally and not really as a rabbi at this moment.
I charge for therapy, by the way. So,
And I'll always point out when I'm not speaking as a rabbi, but as a parent, because we have an open dialogue, we set goals for ourselves that me and my wife have trouble keeping. Maybe I shouldn't speak for my wife, for myself. No phones, certainly out by dinner. And as a Rav, there's always calls coming in. Texting today for a Rav is the most common way to ask a shayla. Pictures of hashkachos. And it's my daughters who say, Daddy, it's dinner time, put down your phone. And I think that really opens up dialogue because we all need musar. So, I want to ask your opinion on this because I've started something with my son. My son's 5 years old. And
he texts you his shilas?
He's not so far off. And I'm looking at him. I have 4 daughters and a son. My first son, and he's in yeshiva now. And I'm nervous as a parent. He's entering a world that I don't know of. I also remember the world of Commodore and Atari and the first Nintendo and Sega. And how's he going to... So I started to tell him, when I go to shul in the morning, you could use my phone because I'm going to shul now. And I'm leaving my phone with you. And I tried to let my children also know, in davening, you can't reach me. I don't have my phone with me. So often in shul... I remember once we were davening Shemona Esrei. These are 2 true stories. And when you bow by Modim, you're supposed to bow to the left because the Shekhinah is to the right. And this is really what happened. Someone left their ways on. And as I was about to bow by Modim, their phone went off and it said, turn left, turn left. And another time in the middle of Shemona Esrei, someone dropped their phone. Actually, it was in their pocket at first. And their wife called and they had a special ring. And it was their wife, was the ring, said, it's your wife, pick up the phone, it's your wife, pick up the phone. And he got so nervous, he started to panic, and he dropped the phone. It was like a wild goat loose in the shul. Everybody started laughing. I think one thing we can do as parents, especially as fathers, and something concrete that those that are listening are watching, to show some responsibility, is to announce to our children when it is inappropriate to use a phone, whether it's that by dinner or whether it's by shul. And I think if we demonstrate our own sacrifice I think that will open up dialogue and make children believe that we understand the frustration and we're going through it ourselves.
100%.
Right.
The parental modeling piece
That's okay.
is so important.
Right.
And I just so I personally I don't have my phone with me during chakras when I'm wearing talis and tefillin. And, you don't have to applaud. It's just, it's a thing that I do. The good news is my chakras is down to 6.5 minutes, so that works out really well. But yeah, certainly the parental modeling piece.
Right, so I just wanted to just chime in about the screen time, because when I was talking to the kids and just from hearing from the kids, they know when they're on it for too much, and they're willing, they're open to the idea, for their parents to sit down and talk to them and to come up with something that's reasonable. The kids are not trying to get more screen time and trying to, chop a little more screen time here or there. They just don't have a clue how much they're on it. When you mentioned that on the iPhone, it tells you how much time. When we did a survey, they said, most of the kids said, oh, I'm on it maybe 2 hours a day. But when they reflected and looked and saw how much they actually did spend on their phone. And again, going back to what Dr. Shapiro was saying, when we're talking about being on the phone, it doesn't mean being on the phone to do homework or being on the phone, talking to their parents or being on the phone, even texting. They don't consider that, so much as screen time. But they had no clue, the reality and their perception, was so far apart.
One of the psychological impact components that we see is the inability to self-regulate. And that's one of the reasons why giving kids devices at young age, sometimes as parents we think, all right, if I give my child a device, it keeps me off the hook for a little bit. But the reality is because kids can't self-regulate, adults have a hard time self-regulating when it comes to technology. But when you give it to kids, it ruins their self-image because they know they can't control it. And so what often happens, and I think this is a challenge that most parents, I know I experience this, your child will come home from school and they'll say, okay, I'm going to do my homework soon. Can I play video games for 15 minutes? And you say, oh yeah, sure, seems reasonable enough. And what happens for most of us is like 3 hours later, we realize our child is still on the device. So one little parenting tip, very practical. Most of us in that situation, we realize, oh my gosh, what have we done? And we panic, and then we yell at our kids, we're like, get off the computer, you should have known, et cetera, et cetera. And what has never happened, I've never had a parent say to me that in that situation, the child responds by saying, oh, thank you. I hadn't realized that my allotted time had expired, and you've brought it to my attention now, so let me turn off the video game. That never happens. Right. And so the idea in that space is you got to give 5 more minutes. It's counterintuitive, but at that point you realize it's been too long. 5 more minutes allow them to transition.
I'll just quickly share something that my daughter-in-law actually introduced us to, and it's called a timer. She'll allow her child to use the computer, but she'll put a timer on it, and then the kids have learnt that when the timer goes off, then they hand back, and I've seen this, live, that they hand back the device. So that's a practical tip.
If I can for a moment, and something you said interestingly before, right? You think you're limiting and you're setting up a timer. I mean, my son, who I hope is not watching now, we put a timer on his iPod, and so when he's done with that, he goes to the laptop. And when the timer there runs out, he goes to his video game. When the timer there runs out, he goes to the television. And so obviously there are multiple challenges that continue to arise. But Rabbi Feld, let me ask you a question, because you mentioned something before in talking about video games, about what the content is on the video games and how the video game makers are making the video game in such a way to attract them, to really addict kids into the game. Obviously, I forget already the game that was mentioned. Fortnite, right? And clearly I'm not a big fan, but I know my son plays a game called Roblox, right? And I think a lot of parents are dealing with that. And the issue is not so much the game. It's allowing them to connect with other kids in their class, and arguably that would be okay, but what is beyond that? Can they connect with other people, and how many people are connecting with them? And so talk about some of the safety, the safety concerns that you would have with some of these games, and again, as a parent, how would you talk to your kids about it?
Okay, so again, the technical component Dr. Shapiro can get to and talk more about, but definitely, when kids get on, a gaming device and they play games, a lot of times it's their equivalent of going out to the playground. Nowadays kids aren't. You go to parks, except we're in COVID, so all the parks are taped off. But even before COVID, you would usually see, I remember from growing up, I would be out, playing football Sunday afternoon, and I would play for 2 or 3 hours out in the park. You don't find that so much anymore with the kids because they're all indoors. Whether it's because the parents are, nervous about the dangers that are out there, or whether it's an attraction of the games, but they're indoors, they're playing games the whole time, and they're playing, for them, that's their social interaction. However, it's very easy to, to go from there to other social, and make other social connections, and that's where, a parent has to be has to be mindful and be aware of what's happening.
I think you meant soccer, by the way, not football. But leaving that aside,
I meant football.
On that point, because
English football.
I've had Balabatim and parents mention this to me, it's so different than us growing up. As a parent, and I speak now as a parent, you used to be able to monitor your child's emotional well-being. You will know the friends that typically came over, who stopped coming over. Because everything is taking place online, and this is somewhat of a different question, but a corollary to what you're discussing, and a minor point that often gets missed. It's very hard to gauge your child's emotional health and also their social status in school, which consciously and subconsciously is very important for a parent to be aware of. That's how you monitor a child's change, whether it's grades or social support. How do we monitor that? Because they're not playing soccer outside or baseball outside, leaving aside issues of health and athleticism, etc. How can a parent best monitor children in such a world?
Well, the most important thing to look out for is just any change, really. It doesn't have to be a change in a certain area or in a certain behavior. Any change is already, a red flag, or not necessarily a red flag, but it should give you enough reason to investigate. Sleeping, eating, those dress, even though, well, with COVID, that may not be so true, but eating habits, sleeping. Sleeping is probably by far, one of the most, telling signs with regard to your child's emotional behavior. If they're not sleeping well, that means that they're occupied, that their mind is not where it should be.
Should we be monitoring our children, their devices and their game activity, even to see the comments going back and forth between friends? I know these are such frivolous and dismissed comments that happen so quickly, but how else can we gauge the popularity and the friends, the cliques, other than socially online? Is there another way?
Well, I wouldn't look exclusively at the online experience. We want to find balance. I mean, video games and screen time, and just to talk about why did Fortnite become so big? What was it about that game that just blew up? And the answer really is that it was the first social game that you could play across different platforms. So you could have an Xbox, you can have a Wii, I could have a phone, and we can all play the same game at the same time. And it became a social experience. And that's what the draw is today for video games, is the social component. And certainly there are settings that limit the network, whether it's Roblox or Fortnite or Among Us or Minecraft. These are all games that, assuming you as a parent are comfortable with the content of the games, that can be a social experience. And so that is what the draw is, and it's the new way that kids are socializing today, but it really needs to be balanced as well. In fact, what you were describing with your brothers earlier on with the Commodore, where you all gathered around and played together, the video game was the catalyst, but the activity was a group social activity, which is qualitatively different than when you sit and play video games in your basement when no one else is around. That's qualitatively different. And so when we look at that social experience, there's always going to be a tipping point, right? So, there's a lot of research that's actually over the years that has compared video game play to television watching. So television watching is what I refer to as consumption. You're just taking in, but there's no process. But kids who play video games in many ways, and it's not limited to video games, you could play chess as well and develop those skills, but there's a thought process going on. Kids actually are better at problem solving. The video game players do not believe there's a problem that can't be solved. And it's an amazing way of thinking about things. Collaborative problem solving, multitasking, these are all skills that you can develop while playing video games. Now, there is always going to be a point of diminished returns. So like at some point, those benefits that you're getting from it drop off. So what is that point? Basically, I think that if you're 35, living in your parents' basement playing Fortnite by yourself, you've probably passed the point of diminished returns. I think, does the panel agree on that? Yeah?
Well,
No.
let me ask you,
Yeah.
let me take it, because we talked about the social impacts here. Let me take it in a bit of a different direction, because I know we're getting a lot of these questions are coming in. Talk about the peer pressure, right? One person in the class or one kid in the class has a certain device and another doesn't. Or something which is a bit more, a bigger problem I think these days is, when is the right time to get a cell phone, right? You know, all the kids have it. Someone once told me they want their son or daughter to be the last one in the class to have it. If everybody else has it, then you can have it. What's the answer? How do parents deal with that?
I mean, I think fear of missing out, what we call FOMO.
Look at you, bilingual.
I want to say that I wrote an on me about FOMO in 2011, and nobody knew what it meant, and I happened to have read an article in the New York Times, and I thought it was fascinating. I think that it's not really what you're asking. You're asking specifically to when's the proper time to get a device, and I'll leave that to the professionals. But as a Rav, the issue of kinna, which is one of the midos, jealousy, which is so destructive to ourself. You know, you take a poll of a class, and you ask them, who here has ever spoken Lashon Hara about friends and loved ones? Everybody will raise their hand. We'll all admit that. Who here has been angry at family and loved ones? We'll all admit that. Who here has been jealous of loved ones? It's almost like you feel naked. No one wants to admit that because it is so disruptive to our lives and it's so real, Kinna. And online has led, one school psychologist gave me this example. She was outside her house and she was getting into her car to go to a meeting. Listen to this story. And her neighbor was making a wedding, their eldest daughter. And everybody gets out to go to the car, and they're all dressed in their best. And the mother says, and they're in a rush because they got to go to the photographer, the hall, 4:30, it's the Kala's time. And the mother says, we have to take a family picture. And the Kala's crying, Ma, what are you doing? There's no time. And the mascara's running. And the younger sister saying, Ma, what are you doing? And her mother is calming her down. The whole family's in a tizzy. And finally, if they take, for 1 second, they get a picture. They wipe the mascara, they all put on a fake smile. And the child psychologist said to me, could you imagine? They put that on Facebook. And everybody looks at that picture and say, why can't we be like that family? Why can't we be like that snapshot in time? So I think the issue of social pressure, it may even go beyond, which I want to hear their expertise, of when do we get them a phone and the social pressure of getting them a phone and how to filter the phone. But I think the opening of the door of kinna in general, of jealousy in general, is really metastasized during this time of technology.
Dr. Shapiro, I think in our day it was Reebok pumps, right? Who's getting
Yes.
the sneakers with the pump on it, right? And again,
Those were the kids who couldn't afford the Jordans. So,
That's right, Air Jordans.
Yeah.
Right, but
So-
you need to verify that first of all. You know, a lot of times, you know, kids will come home and say, you know, everybody in my class has, you know, the latest, and it's not necessarily correct. You know, and you know, then you know that gives an opportunity for parents to speak to other parents, and then you know when they find out that it's not necessarily correct, maybe there's something that can be done. You know, it is true that you know sometimes everybody has, and your child doesn't, and you know that's going to be you know you're not going to be able to keep it back for very much longer. But you have to be very mindful that you don't want to get to a point where your relationship with your child has been so damaged because you've kept them at bay and not given them the smartphone when it's inevitable that they're eventually going to get it. So again, do your due diligence, verify, make sure that it's correct. But if it is correct, you're going to eventually, you know, you have to be open. But it's a good time for you to sit down with your child and to negotiate and to work things out, to come up with a plan. And you know what? You need to do that collaboratively. You need to let them, you know, have input. In fact, that, you know, probably if you allow them to have 99% of the input, you'll get a pretty good agreement. Yeah, so this is, you know, the time when you need to really, and by the honest truth is you should have had this conversation with them, you know, ahead of time, but you need to start talking to them about the opportunity.
Would you advise parents and school principals to have a dialogue with each other so they could be on the same page of being aware of what the next step is, what was socially acceptable, to be aware of concerns? Because I don't see that happening so much, a dialogue among parents. I see it going between parents and children.
we had a number of years ago, we had an issue with one particular ninth grade class where there was a real epidemic of cyberbullying. And every time we were able to squash it down, it went underground for a month, and then it just erupted, and it became really, it was scary just to be, to see some of the posts and some of the cyberbullying that they were doing. And as a school, we felt that we needed to bring all the parents in and to get them on the same page, to let them know what was happening and to work with them to do something about it. We did it, and to a large part it was successful, but it wasn't an easy task. Yeah.
Let me go to Dr. Shapiro, and I can say, and obviously, all the successes we have in my household are thanks to my wife and all the things that she does. When we got my daughter our first iPod, and I actually consulted with Dr. Shapiro, and I asked, what do you think I should do? And he said, look, not everybody is created equal, and every kid is going to adopt the technology differently. But you have to set some ground rules. And so that's what we did at home, right? You can't take it into your room at night. You have to leave it, in the living room. You can't, you can't use it in the morning when you're getting ready for school. Certain sort of ground rules. Again, Dr. Shapiro's sort of pragmatic advice to parents who are listening today, and obviously there's no one answer that's going to fit everybody, but what would you tell them in sort of as a mechanism to potentially help them prepare?
So yeah, that communication piece. When my kids wanted their first iPhone, right? So I started to hear about it, when they were in ninth grade. Like, oh, everyone has an iPhone. Everyone has an iPhone. But everyone has. And then at some point you verify, oh wow, everyone does really have at this point. My oldest was 15, and basically her entire class had. And there were social consequences by not having the iPhone. And so as parents, yes, verify. And yes, we have to make a decision. And this doesn't only apply to technology, but as parents, we're always going to make the decision about the consequences of action versus the consequences of inaction. So the consequences of not giving them a phone is going to have its own problems, and the consequences of giving them the phone is going to have its own problems. So, and this it's not just a technology issue. This is across the board. As parents, we're always, can my child cross the street? Can my child go to this person's house? These are decisions we always have to make. Once you've decided that it's time, the social norms dictate, the consequences are more severe to not give them the device, the process by giving them the device has to be one that is rolled out in a thoughtful way. So for my oldest daughter, she was 15, I sat her down, I set up my computer with a projector, and I made her sit through my 3-hour version of my technology lecture. And it was amazing that she
said, I don't need a phone.
It was amazing that she was able to see because her eyes were rolled so far back in her head. But we went through the whole spiel, and I explained my concerns: social, psychological, behavioral, day-to-day, all the functioning issues. And I said, you come up with a contract that would make me feel comfortable giving you a phone. Very much what you're saying, put it on them. Right. And make them really earn it. So she came up with a contract with her people. Her people were her friends who really felt bad for her that I was her father. And then I reviewed the contract with my people. We made revisions. We sent it back. And it was just a back and forth process that took a few days. But at the end of it, we had a contract that the expectations were really clear. And then she got the phone. And the rules were very clear. Before, one of the early rules was before she sends any pictures, she has to get them approved by us, the parents. And the phone did not have set up in a way that we were comfortable with. But so the first 3 months, she would come to us with every picture. Can I send this? Can I send this? Can I send this? And what that did was it trained her to be thoughtful and deliberative. And at some point, we said, you know what? You've demonstrated responsibility. You don't have to show us your pictures anymore every time you send. So that's part of the process, communicating and being consistent and following up with that as well.
On your point, Dr. Shapiro Felt, or Dr. Felt, Reb Schwab has this beautiful idea. He wrote this in the 1960s, that when everybody has something, we have to realize the limits of what we can do as parents. We have to resign to the fact that we live in 2020, and especially if we send to certain schools, they're going to have to keep up with the Joneses, and you can't give them that, bequeath to them that social repercussion. And Reb Schwab talks about, speaking about COVID and the vaccination, that whether it's technology or culture, it's an inoculation. Because an inoculation really is giving a little bit of the disease. And to completely hold back from a child what's within their social stratosphere is only going to damage them. But to give it to them in a controlled manner, like a vaccine, helps build up a tolerance and a security and a responsibility that will help them. I do want to take advantage. So is it okay if I just ask?
Please.
But you touched upon a little bit. We talked about games, and my daughters, if they're watching, they'll forgive me. I think this might be a little bit of a gap between boys and girls. The girls play games, maybe boys a little bit more. And I wonder if my observation is correct as a rabbi. Certainly among youth, the ability of having kavanah, just to bring this into rabbinic land, have kavanah during tefillah, when although it's not a passive sport, it's somewhat passive. I've noticed a shift with too much gameplay and too much screen time, the ability to sit and concentrate, be it in tefillah, be it with learning Torah, and let's not even get into reading a 600-page Russian novel. How do we as parents, and I, again, taking advantage of my time with you, deal with the balance between gameplay and what it's doing to the brains of our children and the patience of our children?
You know, I first of all, intuitively, I think you sense that boys and girls are different when it comes to technology. Boys tend to use technology for entertainment purposes, you know, games, videos, etc. Girls tend to use it for social purposes, and that's the primary driver. Now, it's not to say that girls don't play video games or watch videos, and it's not to say that boys don't use it for social purposes, but one of the fascinating things that we find is that girls get smartphones about a year earlier than boys do in the Jewish community, about a year earlier. And that's because the social drive to be able to connect and communicate is stronger than the entertainment drive. We can postpone entertainment, but it's very hard to postpone the social piece. Specifically, you know, when kids are utilizing devices, the brain today is different than the brain was 20 years ago. It's a different brain. There's neuroplasticity. Our brains are constantly adjusting to the environment around us. And it's hard to say. Certainly in a spiritual sense, it probably creates more difficulty. But when you think about what the world is demanding of kids today, the world is demanding the ability to multitask. The world is demanding, it's reducing quality expectations, and it's promoting output. And so we've reduced quality. We are seeking multitasking. There are companies today, JP Morgan Chase, has people play video games in the hiring process to see how they think, how they problem solve, etc. I see you think that's a good idea for onboarding, you know. But this idea of what the expectations are, it certainly does come in conflict with the idea of sitting down and focusing and you know, really delving into a block Gemara and all the effort and focus that requires. It is certainly more challenging today.
And Shabbos,
Yeah.
Shabbos Kodesh is also a challenge because of this idea of needing your brain to have some type of excitement.
The technology has essentially the level of has upped the level of entertainment that we need to provide our kids if we want them to be, you know, so to speak, not bored. You know, they're always saying that they're bored, and you know, it's very easy for us to go and passively give them. You know, they get passive entertainment from their smartphones. And if we want to give them active entertainment, you know, it's very difficult. There's very few things that can substitute for the allure of that, you know, the entertainment that the smartphone provides. And what happens because of that is that their you know, focus is lessened. Their ability to sit and, you know, even to sit still is not there. You know, and right away, you know, as an educator, you know, we're right away we'll say, oh well, they have ADHD, or that, you know, they can't sit down. But really, what's happening is that the technology has got them to such a point where everything pales in comparison to it. So therefore, you know, they're looking for it. They need that high, so to speak, from what they can get from their smartphones, and you can't. You know, Black Gemara is very difficult, and it's not really, you know, fair to offer that to them as a substitute. So, you know, and however, you know, going back to your previous point, you know, I'm talking about 20 years ago. You know, we used to say that, you know, I was a Rebbe, you know. We would teach for, you know, 10 minutes, and then you had to give them, so to speak, a commercial. the Rebbe had to kind of like change tracks a little bit, because it was very similar to what was the kids' attention span on the TV. They would watch for 10 minutes, and then there was a commercial. So in order to keep the kids going, you couldn't keep them going for longer than, so to speak, those 10 minutes. Now with the smartphones, there's no time. Essentially you've lost even that commercial break, and we need to, that's why more, when it comes to teaching, and when it comes to parenting even, you need to, supply much more energy and more sophisticated type of entertainment to be able to get them to leave their technology. So how do you do that?
I just want to add, I don't think this is unique to kids. I think as adults, we also have a much harder time focusing. Not too long ago, I was checking out the movie The Swiss Family Robinson from the 60s. It's an old movie. You can look it up somewhere. And it was so boring, I couldn't even get through the opening credits. It was so slow, and these long camera shots, and and even as an adult, it's harder to focus on. But what I think fundamentally, to your point, how do you replace this need for entertainment? And I think that's fundamental is relationships. The relationships that we have with our kids, the time we spend with them, is so critical. We in my house, we do similar to you. We call it going dark for dinner. We put our devices away during dinner time. We find out about the day, what you get on the test. We talk about it.
I've experienced this at your house. Very unpleasant having to shut off my phone.
Right, Dr. Shapiro is 100% correct. Maslow has this hierarchy of needs, and which essentially goes through. What motivates people, and let's say, safety, food, basic needs are going to motivate anybody over anything, any luxuries. And, he talks about the need for relationships, the need for connection, and that's, number 3 on the list. That's, that means it's the need for that connection is so strong that you could use that, and if you have that, if you spend the time with your child, then that can be much greater, and it can be more worthwhile for them than even spending time on their smartphone.
I would just add rabbinically, Shabbos for the parents watching is such an opportune time, and I fail in this because I never have to work on Shabbos. And I'm so tired when I come home for my meals. I just want to eat and go to sleep. But if we can make Shabbos, they can't use their phone. And we know this is a challenge in our community. There are some children who are challenged by not using their phone. On Shabbos, I don't think this is a secret. I think Shabbos is a time we should have games, by the Seder. There's all these games you could play by the Seder. We should invent these games for the meal, discussions, to really enhance our Shabbos Seudos. This might be the only time during the week that we really could focus on each other without, I think that would increase Kedusha Shabbos, but also for 25 hours without a smartphone.
There was a fascinating study UCLA did in 2014 where they measured kids' ability to read facial expressions and social cues, which is the fundamental foundation for any social connectivity. And they got a baseline, then they sent them to a sleepaway camp without technology, no screens. And they measured them again. And they found that after only 5 days without technology, their ability to read facial expressions, social cues, and form meaningful connections vastly improved. And so this study is fascinating, and it's been replicated. It teaches us 2 very important pieces. One is that digital technology is reducing the quality of our social interactions, but the more important finding is that we can repair it, and we can repair it by spending time without technology. And we're so fortunate that we have 25 hours a week, but they used to say about smoking, people who smoke during the week, Shabbos, they no problem not smoking, but the second Shabbos was over, that drive came back. And similarly with technology, it's how long from the extinguishing of the Havdalah to the smartphone, how long did that take?
At least you have the 25 hours.
Yeah. I can tell you I miss smoking every minute of Shabbos. But I read in the New York Times, when I used to smoke, I haven't smoked in 20 years. The New York Times had an article several years ago of adults, a sleepaway camp for a week for adults. It was in 2018, and the whole goal was could you go away for 5 days without any devices, any smart devices? And they did it to unplug. And I don't have the article with me, but I think we all could benefit, is what I'm saying. Not just, and I think if our children see the excitement, you can't fake sincerity. You know what they say in politics? The most important
You
thing
can
is
fake
sincerity,
sincerity,
and if you could, I turn to Phil. The most important thing is sincerity, and if you could fake that, you've got it made. You can't fake sincerity to our kids, and if they see that we recognize this as a challenge that we're going through together, we're going through this together, and Shabbos could be wonderful. And
You mentioned earlier, even at the dinner table, making sure that at the dinner table, parents alike put away their phones, and you're challenged because as a rabbi you're going to get those texts that you have to answer, except on Shabbos, but during the week. But that's a great beginning, to make sure that time is tech free.
I always, I admire Hatzalah members. I could never do it because that idea of being tethered, even on Shabbos, I could never do that. I need that break. So it's an amazing thing that they're able to do that. Just one point that I wanted to mention. There's a lot of research on texting addiction. That people who cannot stop themselves from texting, and so it actually correlates interestingly with what has been termed half Shabbos. People that are otherwise Shomer Shabbos. Dr. David Pelkovitz did a study, I think it was in 2012. He found that about 18% of otherwise Shomer Shabbos kids in modern Orthodox day schools were utilizing texting or social media on Shabbos. Otherwise, Shabbos.
could we just repeat that study?
Yeah.
Again, because we have to underline that and highlight that for those watching. It's a shocking study.
It was about 18% of otherwise Shomer Shabbos teens were utilizing social media or texting on Shabbos. And the research on texting addiction, and I believe that study also found a very strong correlation with social anxiety. And so this is interesting. We tend to take a theological approach to if someone's being with Chal Shabbos, we have to educate them on Shabbos and Kedusha Shabbos, the importance of it. But if the underlying issue is anxiety or social anxiety stems from I don't feel comfortable in face-to-face conversations. But through the digital medium, that anxiety is reduced because of something called the online disinhibition effect. I feel less inhibited online. We all know that we're more likely to do or say something online than we would in a face-to-face conversation. So for most people, that can get them into trouble. For kids or adults with social anxiety, it's their one way to connect with other people that they don't feel that discomfort. And so then you tell them for 25 hours, you can't have that. And so the approach, in my opinion, in dealing with the challenge of Shabbos for those that really are struggling with it, is to look at the anxiety, social anxiety piece.
I've noticed, and I've spoken to teachers and other parents, that kids, we all like to sleep on Shabbos, and certainly as teenagers, but kids are sleeping a lot more on Shabbos. And sleep is a mini suicide. They're so addicted to their phones, and they don't have that access. If they're, Baruch Hashem, it's not even a Havamina. They would never consider breaking Shabbos. I think we do see that addiction, for lack of a better term, and that social anxiety. You've touched on so many things I want to.
I was just going to add that another major component though is boredom. It's the kids are bored. And as I mentioned earlier, the technology just exacerbates the whole boredom issue. And when it comes to Shabbos, they don't have the technology, and if they're bored, then they can rip their hairs out. They don't know what to do with themselves. That's also called Shabbos.
Let me firstly just again thank you everybody for parents and everybody watching at home. Continue to send your questions. I appreciate the feedback that we're getting. I want to shift a little bit to warning signs because I remember 8 or 10 years ago. I remember it was on the cover of one of the New York tabloids where a politician during a meeting was caught on his BlackBerry. BlackBerry was all the rage. And that was front page news, right? During a meeting, a political meeting, he was on his BlackBerry the entire meeting and not paying attention. Front page news. Today, right, we have new social norms. Looking at your watch is a universal sign that you're bored and the meeting is over. Although nowadays you're getting your email on your watch, right? And so you're looking at your watch not because you're bored of the meeting, but it's become a new social norm. How do parents adapt to these new social norms that continue to change, and how do they look for the warning sign? So what's the warning sign that there potentially is a problem? And
I guess the biggest warning sign with regard to that is, if the device is by their child's side the whole time, and if you attempt to even ask them to put it aside, how they react to that. And if you, chas v'shalom, take it away and put it somewhere, what their reaction is. Those are going to be clear warning signs that there's an issue here.
Do you recommend, as parents, that we take the phone away for an hour, a day, whatever it may be, a plug-in time where they have to actually separate. Have you ever been walking down the street and you feel your phone vibrate in your pocket, and you go into your pocket and your phone's not there?
Right.
And I was speaking to a former president of mine. He's Mike Chaskis, a doctor. He said that these are phantom limbs.
Phantom vibration.
Phantom vibrations, like when a soldier loses an arm.
Right.
It's like we're attached to it. It's an aver.
Right.
It's an aver. It's a limb. Do you feel, based on the question that was just asked, and the test that you said, the anxiety by separation, and for some of us who have older children, it might be too late to start this. With young children, should we start to separate them from their phones on trips at home from time to time?
That definitely would be training them. You would have to do it in a way that they're working together with you. It's got to be a collaborative effort, and but it makes a lot of sense. You're training them, not to need it, and therefore you're training them to then occupy themselves without it. There's that component too. So you may need to be able to have something to help them get through that time. You may need to give them your attention. You may need to spend time with them, to schmooze with them during that time. Just to take it away and let them, kind of hang without it. You're just inviting trouble, and you may be setting them up. But certainly, the more that they learn how not to need it, the more they train that muscle, and the mailer.
So I want to also say, a lot of the fundamentals that we see around technology, it applies to kids, but it applies to adults as well. So one of the examples.
Speak for yourself, Dr. Shapiro.
One of the examples I like to give. There's a study on kids' cognitive functioning, and the mere presence of a device reduces cognitive functioning, even if they're not touching it. They've done standardized tests. If the phone's on the table, they do not do as well as if the phone is in the bag. Adults as well. You know that when you're in business meetings, you know that when you're meeting with someone, just having the phone around, you're not as focused. In fact, the research indicates that it takes about 20 minutes to fully immerse yourself into a task to be achieving flow, the highest level of functioning. Yet we check our devices about every 10 minutes. So we are never actually maximizing our full potential when it comes to technology. So again, technology is awesome, it's amazing, and we can utilize it for the good, and we want it to be an enhancement. But if we're not accessing it in a responsible way, if we're not putting it away in a responsible way, we are not fulfilling our full potential. When it comes to kids, one of the critical messages we need to show kids is there's a time for technology, there's a time to benefit and enhance their lives as a result of it, and there's a time for not technology. And one of the ways we did that early on, even before my kids had devices, and it's an important point to recognize, we tend to think about kids and technology when they get devices. That's the tipping point. But all our kids are utilizing devices well before they actually get their own device. So when we used to drive to Toronto, still do, but we have a rule, no screens until we're out of New York City. Now, the average drive to Toronto is about 8 hours. 2.5 of it is just getting out of New York City. The rest is, it's pretty quick. And so setting the tone, there's a time for screens, there's a time not for screens. First, within New York City, no screens, then we get out, then it's okay, we can bring out the screens and go through that process. So I think demonstrating a time for screens and time not for screens really helps kids understand where the challenges might be.
Dr. Shapiro, let me just sort of stay on that for a second. Is there a time of day, right? It's more damaging in the morning or in the evening, right? There was once, and again, something that we do is we don't allow our children to take their phones into their rooms, right? Once they're going to their room and they're going to sleep, they could read their books, but we don't want them to have their devices. Go to sleep is the last thing they're doing. We kind of sort of separate. Is there sort of morning, evening, different times that have different impacts on potentially our kids?
So I'll start with the kids, and again, this applies to adults as well. There are numerous studies on how screens affect quality of sleep. Harvard University did a fascinating study on comparing reading a book at bedtime versus reading from an e-reader at bedtime, which is a good comparison because you're basically engaging in the same behavior. And you don't have to have gone to Harvard to figure this out. What happens when you read a book in bed? For most of us.
Fall asleep.
Fall asleep, very good. We didn't rehearse that, obviously. You fall. In fact, I have a book on my nightstand that I've been reading for 8 months, and I'm still on page 2. and it's not because I learned on Chofetz Chaim that it takes 8 months and I'm still on page 2. That's not the reason. But that idea, so when we look at reading a book, and when they look at reading an e-reader, and that's just reading. It's not social media, it's not it impacts learning production in the brain. Based on and assuming that you have FOMO, which kids do, and they're worried on their grade chat, someone's going to say something at 3 in the morning that if they don't see it in real time, if they have to wait till 6:30 the next morning to find out, they will lose their social life in the next month. Perhaps the greatest gift that we can do our kids is not allowing them to have their devices next to them at bedtime. And almost every kid will tell you, why do they need their phone next to their bed? An alarm clock. So we're very fortunate here in the Paris County. We have amazing savings. I think we have 2 amazing savings, right? And they sell these brown boxes with big red numbers on them that serve the
$5.99.
yeah. And that's the 77% of the kids that I've polled, probably close to 4,000 kids across North America, say that they end up going to bed late as a result of their technology.
You mentioned something, you asked a question, and I'm very impressed with the rule that you have for your kids. I may adopt that. Is there a time, and late at night, I hope this is not going too off topic, but it really directly relates to this. I heard from Yoni Fine, he's a principal in Hollywood, Florida, Browser Maimonides Hebrew Academy. And we were doing a program like this about 2 years ago. And he asked the parents in the room, who here has 12-year-old girls would allow your daughter to go to an event at 2 a.m. unsupervised by parents? Nobody raised their hand. And he said, that's what's happening at 2 a.m. on WhatsApp. Not that anything nefarious is going on, but nobody's finishing Masechtas either. I know we didn't touch on this yet. You mentioned, is there a time of day? I do think we have to be concerned when parents are sleeping that things of that go bump in the night, which might be a whole other topic to get to. But that I would agree with Dr. Shapiro. Late at night when parents are sleeping, I really love your idea of taking the phones. My older daughters are watching this right now, hiding their phones from me before I come home.
I was speaking in LA, and a parent came over to me afterward, and he said that his 4-year-old, who was taking a nap on a Sunday afternoon, came to his room and took his phone, took his finger, put it on the phone, and he wasn't sure, should I be proud at the innovation that this child is demonstrating, or should I be upset? But that idea of...
I've been woken up from my son putting the phone to my face and lifting me up. Yeah.
Definitely creative. And the reality is, though, that this just segues into the idea that we spoke about this earlier. We're really coming from behind. As Ellie said, we're internet or technology explorers. Technology explorers.
Immigrants.
Right. So essentially,
Novices.
Right, they're natives, and we're really playing catch up. How many parents here have asked their kids to help them when they're stuck with something that the phone's not working? They really know so much more, and they know how to get around. Have the best filters we can have. Whatever technological device to block what they're trying to do, they'll get around it. And the reality is the only way to ensure that is through dialogue and through relationship.
100%.
I think also just parents, not to be cliche, you've spoken, both of you, so eloquently about how social media unmoors us from social interactions, reading social cues, having in-face social relationships. So I think aside from putting down our phones, and I know this is going to sound cliched, but for mothers and fathers to show love to each other in front of the children and have dialogue together by the meal and laugh together by the meal without their phones, interaction that they could look up to and idealize and take to school. I think a mother and a father, not separately but together, could play a tremendous role of how to socialize and how to communicate.
I just want to say, so I think there are 2 areas that we've touched upon, or actually we've touched more upon on the need to retrofit. So we've done all this wrong, now what do we do? And that really becomes a family process. It can't be that you tell the kids, okay, these are the new rules. That's just not going to work. It has to be, as a family, we want to maximize what technology has to offer. We want it to enhance our lives. It's amazing. It's wonderful. So what can we do as a family? But in a preventative approach, and I know it's called Teens and Screens, but I feel like that's so important. When we talk about kids under the age of 5 and what we are doing to them, we're creating future addicts when it comes to technology. Think about what happens when a 1-year-old goes for a vaccination, right? They go to the doctor, they get the shot, they start crying. What do the parents do? They give them the phone to calm them down. So what is a 1-year-old learning is that a screen and a phone and technology is the way I can soothe myself. I don't know how to self-soothe because I've become dependent on the device, and my parent is not the one soothing me. Traditionally, it was the parent that would, hug and hold and show care. Now we give them the phone. Every time they're distressed, 2-year-old to 3-year-old, we give them the device. Let them go on the device. And we're really, we're creating an addiction at a young age that will be much harder to retrofit if we don't address this early on.
We were driving to Florida.
That chance to self-entertain, just to be happy with themselves.
We were driving to Florida recently, and
Not too recently, quarantine and...
no,
No, yeah, I just want to make sure.
please.
Yeah.
No, before. But I remember if one of my, and I have 5 kids, they're all wonderful. If they're watching, this is a positive side, maybe, I don't know. One of the batteries died. And my wife said, what did we do on a trip when our parents were driving? We would stare out the window, discover ourselves, think about dreams and ideas and anxieties and concerns and hopes. And she looked at us like we fell off, stare out the window. Like, what do you think I am? A rock? And it's such a loss that children don't know how to spend time with themselves, space out, a moment of quiet self-introspection, which again, as a Jew, just bringing it back to Yiddishkeit, is vital to who we are and to self-growth. And I think you're right. We're teaching them how to be addicts at a very young age, and we have to be cognizant of that.
I think there's an app, by the way, for self-reflection. Yeah.
Dr. Spiro, I want to go back to you, and we talked about you created this concept of educational tools. Not just prohibition, but teach kids the right way in which to do it. And so the answer...
I don't know if I created the concept, I just mastered it. Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, I just wanted to...
I think historically, it's sort of what filters are we putting on?
Yeah.
And so we got a number of questions of what filters would you recommend? And I think a lot of the conversation tonight surrounded, it's not just about filtering or limiting, it's about creating the right attitude around technology and how you approach it, how you communicate. So I guess going straight to it, like, would you recommend a filter? And then more importantly, sort of the larger picture in terms of, is that really the answer? And how have things evolved?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the answer is yes, filters are important, mainly because they are a physical manifestation of the values that you're trying to inculcate. So it's, you can say one thing, but the filters become, the physical presence of that. I'm showing, when you give your kids a device, and let's not call it filters, let's call it restrictions or management, device management. Because it's not just about the content, it's about behavior, it's about the amount of time they're spending on it. So that piece of it is very important. People ask, what filter should I get? It's really hard to answer that because everyone's needs are slightly different. Every family's different. Educationally, some schools are using more technology, some schools are using less technology. Some need access to certain things, other people need access to other things. I happen to recommend Apple products in general, the iPhones, iPads, iMacs. The main reason I recommend it is because I'm a shareholder. The second reason I recommend it is because they have the best device management software native to the devices. So I can't tell you how often I get phone calls of when I put whatever filter it might be on, it slows the computer down, it doesn't update, it's created problems. There are some filters that are better than others, but again, it's unique to your family needs. But from a parent perspective, if you get your child an iPhone, and I know we've vilified the iPhone, unfortunately, but that is the most native to managing, to selecting what apps are available, whether there's a browser available, whether it's a whitelist browser, no browser. You can set that up. You can set 30 minutes for this app, 15 minutes for the other app. I don't know if in the Goldfeder home where the kids are going from device to device, it may be hard, but that idea of setting it up, there's nothing like the Apple products, and every other product falls really short. So that's what I recommend. And then, you really have to assess your family, technology needs. But a filter, what I've been critical of is filters in and of themselves don't really do anything. It can't just be the filter. A filter without the conversation, without the relationship, without the dialogue, without the values is almost meaningless. That becomes something for kids to get around. But if it's a filter in conjunction with everything else, that is going to maximize the likelihood that you're going to get your child utilizing technology in a more responsible and healthy way.
Can I comment on the filter issue quickly? Obviously, what you said is correct. Every family has the device for themselves, based on their hashkafa and what they want their child to see. I just want to mention something rabbinically that I think I would be remiss if I don't mention. We can only filter certain things. I want to make parents aware, for those, not that we're looking for new concerns, but this is something that I've seen rabbinically, and I've spoken to colleagues, and they've seen this as well. Something as simple as YouTube. We tend to, and we haven't touched on it tonight, all the issues, things that are in sexual nature and other matters of the internet, which filters can do a good job of preventing. I've had personally, and my friends have had, young teenagers in the shul come to the rabbi that they're having a crisis of faith. First of all, a child to make that phone call to a rabbi, a child to call a rabbi to say, I want to break my fast, I'm not feeling well, that's a tough call to make. To make this call means there's a lot of other children not making that call. And I asked them, where's this coming from? YouTube videos. So the parents walking by and they see Cambridge University, and like, look at my son, look at my daughter. They're not getting enough at wherever they're going. Meanwhile, Professor Dawkins, in 1929, the New York Times created this term, militant atheist. It's not a new term. And there's nobody to combat that. I don't have an answer. I'm here to tell you. One thing I can say is that we as parents, especially with this wonderful technology, we have to be a balancing act and really demonstrate a love, not just the halachos of Torah, but a real demonstration of love and ahava for Torah. Parents need to be aware, even kosher websites are posing a new danger that was unforeseen, at least to me. So with filters, I just want to put that out there.
And again, that's why filters aren't the end-all and be-all. They're important, and they do block some content. But the point you made about kosher websites, on the kosher websites, there is video footage that is graphically disturbing, whether it's dash cam accidents or, someone recently got stabbed in Lakewood and there's CCTV video footage of it, and kids have access to that, and the content, it's disturbing for most adults, is extremely disturbing for kids. And so understanding what they have access to and what they don't, whether you allow them on YouTube, understanding who, do parents know, do you know who your kids are following on YouTube? Who they're interested in. So I know my son likes Dude Perfect. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a bunch of grown men.
I'm going to pretend I don't know anything.
Yeah, so it's a bunch of grown men acting like children, breaking things and doing trick shots, and it's silly. But there's opportunity in that by knowing what your child's interested in talking about it. Oh, tell me about Dude Perfect, or there's a philanthropist named Mr. Beast. He goes around giving money out, and my son likes to watch that. And we talk about that. What did he do? How did he give out money this time? So understanding what your children are interested in, and using that as a catalyst for the relationship. As far as I'm concerned, it all goes back to the relationship. The nuance in the technology. So even if a child does get exposed to something like atheist concepts, to be able to have that conversation, certainly you want to limit that exposure, and again, filters aren't going to do that, but if they have, to be able to have that conversation, oh, what are you watching? And that goes back to family rules and guidelines. If technology is done in a public place and you can see what they're watching and see what and then talking about that, then the behavior itself is less concerning because it fosters dialogue and it fosters the relationship.
I find it fascinating. It's sort of playing games is one thing. There's a fad where you watch a video of other people playing those same games, which I can't wrap my head around.
That's part of the Fortnite law.
So, Rabbi Dr. Feld, let me ask you a question. We talked that not everybody's created equal, right? And every parent has their own mahalach and how they're going to train and teach their children and work with their children. So how do you deal with one parent who tends to be more lenient, or one family, I should say, on a block, let's say, who's more lenient and allows certain things and another doesn't? So now I'm a parent who is put a bit more of a strict control. How do I prevent my son or daughter from going to a friend's house or a neighbor's house? Again, I remember growing up, it was not about necessarily games, but it was about television, right? Some families had television, some didn't. And oftentimes we'd have half the neighborhood was in my house because we had a television in our house. And so how do you, in technology is very, very different. obviously have different times, different challenges. And so how do you deal with sort of the different ways in which parents deal with these issues?
So again, I don't think technology is so different. I remember we moved out to San Diego. I was a principal in the high school there, and our kids went to a co-ed school in elementary school, and they had friends who the parents didn't have any restrictions in terms of what type of movies they could watch. Kashrus was an issue. What we did was we made sure that we got all the games, and we had football table, we had ping pong tables, we had all the latest games in our house, and that way we got all the kids to come to our house. Can we do that with technology? May not be so simple to do that with technology, but certainly to share with your child your concerns and to talk to them about your hashkafa, to have that dialogue and to have the back and forth. We used to talk about these questions at our Shabbos table. Our kids would challenge us. Why are you doing this? Why are you not doing that? And that helped solidify their Yiddishkeit, because they had the question and then they had a discussion and they came up with their own answers to fortify them as they grew older. So this is an opportunity for you to sit down and talk and explain your hashkafa, explain where you get your hashkafa. And you know what? Sometimes I didn't have the answer, and I would say, I don't know. I'm doing this because it's kind of what's done, and I would find out. I would go back and ask my rebbeim, what's the why we do this, and that helped me grow as an adult. So, this is an amazing opportunity for you to have that conversation with your child, to help your child get stronger and understand why they're doing certain things, and to help you.
I think also as a parent, we have to decide what's the chinuch here. Are we preventing our children from watching video X, downloading video Y, or app Y for personal reasons, whether we're religious or not, or are we doing it for hashkafa Torah reasons? And if it's the latter, it better be a true feeling that we are able to give over to the child. You can't fake that. And the honest truth is, to Phil's question and to your answer, we've all had moments as parents when our child gets a certain age, when they get their license, we have to have that leap of faith. At the end of the day, even when we bring games into our house, we're going to be limited. Bringing apps into the house, it's not going to be everything. Our child is going to have that friend who has more than they do. And I think that level of trust is going to start at an earlier age. And if we teach mechanech our children, not just the what we forbid, but why this is important to us, why Yiddishkeit matters, and why this is important to Misorah, or why something is not within our family type of thing to do, but it has to be something real. And I think our kids will live up to it, to that trust. Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, and we also need to add in tefillah, to the mix. Definitely, there's no expectation that everything will go smoothly, but just recognizing that we have to daven to Kodesh Baruch Hu, and it doesn't end. Baruch Hashem, my kids are all married and they have their own kids. It still doesn't end.
Dr. Shapiro, something I think it's sort of a question now we're getting. It's come up a couple of times and we haven't yet talked about it. Social media, right? Social media. The idea is that it's a mechanism in which you can socially interact with your friends. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Facebook. No kids use Facebook.
Well,
yeah.
I'm getting to that. TikTok.
Yeah.
The latest dances.
Yes.
What you're doing, how you're doing it. I mean, there's an argument to be made, right? And I guess some would make it that it's a way for kids to interact in their own creative way, to be more creative, to let other people see the creativity. Two issues, obviously, is sort of number one, what are they putting out? And you mentioned earlier about showing you the pictures before they tweet it, before they send it to their friends. This is a whole different level.
Right.
You're not sending it to one group of friends, you're sending it to the world potentially. And number two is sort of who's reaching them as well.
Yeah, so social networking becomes a big challenge. So I think the first thing that parents need to be aware of, most often kids will come home but everyone has, TikTok, but everyone has. And so, as you said earlier, first you have to verify, does everyone really have it? The other piece is every time you go to the App Store to download something, there's an age recommendation. So Snapchat, for example, I think it's 12 plus. Now, I hear parents complaining, 9 years old, 10 years old, my kid's on Snapchat, and Even Snapchat doesn't think that your 9 and 10-year-old should be using it. So like if you've given it to your 9 and 10-year-old, there should be pause. There is an age recommendation. Next to the age recommendation, there is a reason why they recommend it. Crude humor, nudity, it will list exactly why it's rated a certain age. You then may say, they may say that 12 plus is appropriate, but based on what they're saying, I think, 40 plus might be the appropriate age for utilization of this app. And so that, as a parent, I talk about parents being thoughtful and deliberative when it comes to technology. So social networking, social media, it's the same thing. The next step I think parents should be doing is there are great websites that tell you about movies, about social media, apps, games. Common Sense Media. Common Sense Media has great content to explain where the concerns are, why it's okay, why it's problematic, and parents need to educate themselves. There's no excuse for giving your child a device or software that you haven't thoroughly investigated and looked into it. So when my son wanted to play Among Us, we had a conversation. What does it entail? What's involved? Does he have access to a larger network? Because games today are, in many ways, social networking as well. And so does it connect to a larger network, or is it exclusively the 4 friends that he's going to play with? So parents really need to educate themselves. And if you're unsure and you're overwhelmed, websites like Common Sense Media or YouTube, just type in a search, TikTok, parenting, these, and you have to learn about the devices you're giving your kids. You have to learn about the software that you're giving your kids as well. And then make an informed decision about what you're going to give them access to.
Robert Tab, you want to talk about your TikTok account?
I was about to say musically, and I realized that's over. I can't keep up. This is actually something I'm very passionate about, and it's a shame to me somewhat that I'm a rabbi speaking about this. You spoke a lot tonight, and everybody did, about the 1980s, just to give our age from varying degrees. If in the 1980s, a father would ask their 12-year-old daughter, 13, 14-year-old daughter, let alone 9, stand there, sing these provocative words provocatively, and we're going to make a video cassette, and then I'm going to make a lemonade stand in front of my house. Who wants to buy this video of my daughter? You would be arrested before you get to stand up. This is not a religious issue to me. We are like frogs being boiled in water, that we don't even realize the moment we're in right now. And I think we talk a lot about unity in Yiddishkeit, and there's a need for unity today. Modern Orthodox, Haredi, Hasidish, all Shomerei Torah mitzvos, all people who care about Eretz Yisrael and Torah and Mesorah and continuing having children and great-grandchildren, we need to stand together and realize the moment we're in, for our daughters especially, but for our sons certainly as well. And I don't know what the answer is with TikTok, because there is so much social pressure. Strangers are going on girls, I hope parents are aware of this, on girls' sites and their followers. And they give away pieces of information. Here in Jamaica Estates, it's raining. Oh, she lives in Jamaica Estates. I mean, if you think certain people that we're not going to use the term aren't monitoring these sites and looking for people, we couldn't have our head deeper in the sand. I think this is a very serious issue. And I do think, so that we as a parent could make sure we're not that frog being slowly boiled in water, we have objective people that we can speak to, whether it's rabbanim, whether it's professionals in education, in addition to monitoring websites. And I actually think some Christian review websites are fantastic and give a tremendous amount of information. But we cannot be naive anymore. This is a serious problem for our daughters in particular.
And by the way, we talked about earlier about getting devices, the consequences of action versus the consequences of inaction, I think applies here as well. So for my children, there is no social networking other than WhatsApp. That's the extent of the allowable social networking. Anything they do not, even when other kids had Snapchat and when other kids had Musical.ly, they were not allowed to have it. So I made the decision as a parent, and parents, you have the right to make these decisions as parents, to draw a line in the sand and say, no TikTok, no Instagram, whatever it is, you have the parental right to say no if you feel that the consequences of doing it exceed the consequences of not doing it.
And about that there's an underlying relationship that you have.
Correct. There has to be, the relationship has to be there. All of these assume that you have a good relationship with your children. Because when you start getting into situations with your children where they're being oppositional, or they're being insubordinate, and they're hiding their phone from you, or they're refusing to give you passwords or things like that, it's moving beyond the realm of a technology issue, and now we're talking about a parenting issue or a relationship issue that is much more challenging, that requires more than just advice around how to manage technology at home.
I think we also, just one thing that wasn't mentioned, children have to know that things online live forever. They live forever. And you think, I'm going to do something, we're just having fun. Who knows? Job interviews, we, Baruch Hashem, we were somewhat older when the internet became. Google now has a law in Europe that you could erase negative information if you want, which is pretty amazing. It's a law in the EU. I think that's another message that we as parents need to remember. Our child could be looking for a job one day, and a bullying video, something they put on YouTube, it doesn't disappear.
Yeah, we talked about that. I wrote an article a number of years ago that your child's digital footprint is more important than their academic performance. Because you can be a straight A student when it comes time to get into college. Colleges or businesses, everyone does at least a cursory Google search, a social media search on someone. Other companies, depending on where you're
Shidduchim,
yeah.
It's the new shadchan.
Yeah, but if you have things online that don't reflect well, there are so many opportunities that you can miss. In fact, in June of 2017, Harvard rescinded 10 acceptance letters of students that got into Harvard based on offensive remarks that they made in a private Facebook group. They didn't tweet it. It wasn't for public consumption. In a private Facebook group, they made offensive comments. Someone screenshotted it, shared it with admissions at Harvard, and they rescinded the acceptance. And when you think about kids who get into Harvard, these are disciplined kids. These are smart, disciplined, and how is the trajectory of their life shifted as a result? The flip side is, if you can utilize the opportunity for a digital footprint that is positive, where it shows you're involved with a chesed campaign and tzedakah and opportunities. And again, well, you mentioned with shidduchim, when you Google someone, you see, the shul dinner, they did something. So that becomes a positive digital footprint. There's an opportunity in that to engage in positivity. It's really important.
Yeah, I think to explain to our children, just like they want to have their average, so they get into a great high school and a great college, they should look at, like you said, the internet as part of their resume, because that's really what it is.
And by the way, it's important to recognize that from a default standpoint, we tend to be negative online. Like our baseline, our base default. So like if you were flying, if you drove to Florida, if one flew to Florida, if Delta gets you there on time with your luggage, are you going to tweet, "Great job, Delta, fantastic"? Or are you more likely to tweet if you got there 6 hours late and your luggage is flying back and forth between Florida and New York? We had to deal with that. But what are you more likely to tweet about? The negative. There's actually been studies that found that positive hashtags to negative hashtags, there are 2 negatives to each positive hashtag. Additionally, negative stories spread twice as far, twice as fast than positive ones. Which story are you more likely to see? The one where someone embezzled money from the shul, or the one where someone donated money to the shul? Like, which one are you more? And so by default, we tend to go negative. And as a result of going negative, not only does it impact our well-being, our psyche, our focus, but it also creates a negative digital footprint. The more we send negativity, the more that becomes part of the residue of what we've put online, and people associate us with
I think in that negativity, aside for the social footprint, to circle back, something we discussed such a long time ago, but important to circle back to, these WhatsApp groups that our kids are on, we have to remind our children that there may be a girl that we're excluding, that we have to, there are kids who are not sleeping tonight. Because they're not a part of these groups. Show them the positive.
By excluding,
right.
Forget about what the content and the derogatory remarks. Just by excluding a particular kid, they can already destroy someone's self-esteem.
And I think that's a great way to show them the positive methods of using the internet.
A question that, and we have literally just a couple of minutes left, but I think it is really what is a good way to end in talking about your own devices, parents' own devices, and how they interact with their devices, and how ultimately that will rub off. My father taught me, when my kids were born, that don't expect them to do something that you're not going to do, right? And so if I run to my phone right after Shabbos, why would I expect them not to do that, right? They are going to do the same thing. And so if you can, when you talk about, our kids are doing this, or the schools are failing, or these parents are failing, talk about sort of the responsibility of how you monitor yourself, and how ultimately that's going to play a role.
Is this our closing statement for the evening?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to take
Did
the
you
words.
prepare something? Or?
It looks like.
Here's what I'm going to do for the country. No, I'm going to close with the words of Chazal. The most destructive features of our lives is kina, jealousy, taiva, lust, and kavod, honor. And whether it's choosing who we marry, it shouldn't be based or predicated on those three things. How we choose a profession shouldn't be judged on jealousy of others being jealous of us. The honor we get, wealth, lust. And I think when it comes to the internet, when it comes to technology, when it comes to screens as parents, I think if I could just sum it up, what we have to demonstrate to our children is we do not use this device or technology or really anything for kina. We don't, of course, you can't help it, people are jealous of you, but that's not the purpose of posting a picture. That's not the purpose of making a comment. Kavod, certainly it's okay to have a little bit of kavod come your way, but you do not have a Facebook post for that reason. You said Facebook is passé, whatever the new thing is, or the tweet. And certainly taiva, the one thing that we didn't discuss tonight, we all know as parents, the temptation of internet. If there was a medrash that said you could just push buttons on your table, anything would come up, we would say this can't be a literal medrash, this is a guzma, and this is what we have today. So I think kina, taiva, and kavod, it's a tale as old as time. That was a problem 3,000 years ago. It's a challenge today. And as the Rishonim tell us, if we could defeat this challenge and succeed in using technology like we're doing tonight for the appropriate reasons, then we're on the same level of Rishonim and Nevi'im Rishonim, and the highest levels of Avos, in succeeding in this great Nisayon.
Thank you.
Right after Phil.
I don't have such an eloquent ending, closing statement.
Should have saved the Chazal for the end,
Right.
by the way. I'm just putting it out there.
Other than
No,
just
this wasn't.
saying, again, we are role models to our children. We know that, and certainly when it comes to technology, we have to keep that in mind. That our kids are not going to necessarily follow what we do well and what we do good with technology, but they certainly will follow, what we don't do well, and they won't miss a beat. They'll pick out whenever, somehow, where we weren't true to what we espoused, they'll pick that up. Could be like, as Ellie said, that, the negativity, overshadows positivity by 2 to 1. But
By default, we can change that. Yeah.
Right, and by default, we can change that by doing what's positive. And that's really what we have to bear in mind always as a parent is that we are our children's greatest role model.
Dr. Shapiro for the final word.
Oh, a lot of pressure on me. I wanted to actually just jump off on what you said as far as posting pictures from a kina perspective. I think really that it's an opportunity for us to teach our kids perspective taking and how will someone else view that picture. And I know this becomes an ongoing issue amongst families where there's a family chat where you may have siblings, some are wealthier, some are not as wealthy, and they post their beautiful vacation pictures and the other family sees it. And so there's a certain degree of sense, it's okay to share, but there's a certain sensitivity and perspective taking. How will this picture, how will this comment make someone else feel? And I think that if we're transparent about that with our kids, it's a tremendous opportunity to teach them, really what I think is the fundamental issue around technology. I mean, really it's life itself, but being thoughtful and deliberative. Being thoughtful and deliberative with how we approach technology use, how we model the technology use, as you said, and how we give our children access. Our goal with technology, and we started with, technology is awesome, it's amazing, it's wonderful, but there is a host of challenges that we need to address. And being thoughtful and deliberative means on a daily basis, we need to assess whether technology is enhancing our lives or whether it's an intrusion in our lives. And there are going to be some days where we're great with it as adults or even as kids, where we're going to be great with technology and it's going to serve as an enhancement. And there are going to be other days where we just binge on Netflix and it served as an intrusion. And the goal is the next day should be better. and the next day we should use technology more responsibly, and that ongoing dialogue, that ongoing conversation with our children, modeling it for our kids, having that relationship. The goal really is about the relationship. We have the relationship with our kids, we can go through these conversations together, and we can help them succeed and grow up to be 21st century leaders that are competent and confident in managing their technology.
So thank you, Dr. Shapiro, Rabbi Dr. David Felt, Rabbi Moshe Taub. I want to thank you for this conversation. Again, this is the beginning of the conversation here tonight, and hopefully the beginning of a lot of meaningful conversations at home with our kids. Madraigos continues to be on the front lines, and once again, tonight, is just a continuation of the tremendous work they do. If you enjoyed tonight's programming, make sure you sign up and you look up for Maintaining Connections, a parenting a workshop and parenting group that convenes starting on, it's Mondays 8:30 to 10 p.m. on Zoom, starting on Monday, February 8th. If you're interested in talking with other parents and continuing to get helpful tips, make sure you check out what Madraigos is offering and be a part of the conversation. Again, thank you to the amazing staff here, Mindy Warbleski, Sharon Gross, and of course Rabbi Dov Silver for all the amazing work that you do all year round. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to see you again real soon.